Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You know that I'm really into my composting. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to share my secrets and my tips on how to make compost even faster. So the first tip that I'm going to share with you to make your compost go that much faster is make sure the things that you're going to compost are really small as you can get them. The smaller you get them, the faster they compost. So this is what I've done on this lawn. I've got a load of hedge trimmings and I've spread them out on the lawn, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'm going to blitz them up with my lawnmower. So I'm going to go over this with my lawnmower and get them squished up and smashed up as small as possible, and I'm going to cut the grass at the same time, and I'll end up with a nice mix of material in that. Now what I've done is I've taken material that looks like this, long twiggy intact pieces, straight from the hedge trimmings to something that looks like this. Now this is mashed up. What's happened is they've gone through the lawnmower, the leaves have been squashed up, the cell walls have been broken up, they've been bruised, they've been cut up, and they're into tiny pieces. Now the smaller you get the pieces, what you do is you increase the surface area for the bacteria to attack. That increase in surface area, when the bacteria are attacking, they can break the material down a lot faster. So that's what we've done now. We've taken a massive pile that was spread out all over our lawn, and we've mashed it up and turned it into a couple of wheelbarrow loads of material that is going to break down within weeks. So that's my tip number one. So my next tip when you're building a compost pile to get that compost to go faster is to make sure you have a good mix of material. What I've started with is a layer of grass clippings. Now these are quite dry, it was quite long grass, so it's more like hay. So I started with a layer of that, and already that started to heat up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a good soaking. And one of the real important things about hot composting is the moisture content. If you have a dry compost pile, it won't compost. Likewise, if you have a compost pile that's too wet, again it won't compost. So we'll give that a good soak through. Now I'm going to be back to my layering. Those hedge trimmings that you saw me use the lawnmower to grind up, that's going to be my next layer. So that's going to go on nice and thick. And you might be thinking that this is green, but it's not. It's actually a brown. The reason that you're doing it in layers is what you want to do is you want to build a layer of green material, which is a layer of nitrogen-rich materials, things like grass, things like kitchen scraps, things like manure. And then you want to add a layer of carbon-rich material, and that's what I'm adding here. These hedge trimmings, although they've got green leaves, there's a lot of woody material in here, and that's going to be my carbon material. So a nice layer of that, and now I'm going to add more carbon on top of that. I'm going to add cardboard bits, so lots and lots of cardboard. Rough pieces for your cardboard are absolutely fine. If you want a much easier way of ripping your cardboard, I'll show you my next tip. So to get cardboard like this to rip, it can be quite hard, especially when you're ripping through a lot. It can be quite tricky. But if you soak the cardboard beforehand, it's much easier to rip. And I'm taking big handfuls here, and I'm finding it a lot easier to rip. And you're killing two birds with one stone. So you're not just making an easier way of ripping it, but you're getting that water into it, so it breaks down a lot easier as well. So we get this onto the compost pile. So now on top of this, I'm going to add another layer of grass clippings. Now these grass clippings have already started to heat up because of the black bag they were in. On top of my grass layer, I'm going to add more nitrogen-rich material, and this is lots and lots of horse manure. So it's quite fresh, and that's fine for what we're using it for, because what we're using it for is to break this pile, help break this pile down. It's going to add a lot of nitrogen to this pile. It'll help break all this down nicely. See what's happening right now, as I'm building this compost pile, all the materials are ending up towards the end, towards the back, and there's going to be no material towards the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the front back on, and this is one of the things that you need to do, is when you build a compost pile, go big or go home, because the bigger the compost pile, the faster it'll heat up, and it'll hold that heat and it'll cook a lot better. I'll show you one of my compost piles just over there. So that's my wood chip pile, and I've got that composting down over there, and I've got another compost pile here, just here. So that's breaking down as well quite nicely. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the front on to this compost pile. That way I can fill the front up. So that's my tip number 4, is to make sure that the compost pile is at least a cubic metre. A cubic metre is a good sized pile to break down lovely. And that's what I'm going to do with this. And make sure that the pile is built evenly. Don't pile the material all in one area, towards the front, towards the back, towards the centre, because if you just pile it towards the centre, the sides won't cook. So you want it a nice even pile. And I like these pallets. These pallet bins are one of my favourite ways of composting. These bins are a little bit worse for wear. They're nearly 10 years old, they need replacing, and I'll get round to doing that. They've served me well, and I'm going to rebuild my whole compost area. I'll keep building this pile up, and I'll keep giving you my tips as I do. So another tip as you're building a compost pile is keep the materials varied. So keep as varied materials as possible. It's absolutely fine to put in things like lemon peels and onion peels, absolutely fine, not a problem. See what I've got in here? I've got onions, I've got eggshells, I've got leaves from garden trimmings, I've got jackfruit skins, so that's all going in. The more varied your material, the more varied nutrients that you're going to have in your final product. So that's why I suggest that you vary your material as much as possible. So I've nearly got to the top of my compost pile, and this is one of the ways that I like to break up the sods of grass, because it likes to mat down. And this is another tip when you're composting, is to turn the pile. This is my next tip, is to try and get as much air into the pile as possible, because you want your compost to be an aerobic process rather than an anaerobic process. With a pile like this, I suggest turning it at least once a week. And what that'll do is it'll get that air into the pile. It'll make sure that pile stays aerobic rather than anaerobic. It'll create an atmosphere for healthy bacteria to grow and break all that stuff down. And when you add it to your garden, it's in a nice, healthy state. So that's my next tip. Now I'm going to share with you my secret weapon, and this is molasses. And I like this because it's a really good activator for compost piles. Even just watering your garden with this is really good, because what it does is it feeds the bacteria and it feeds worms, because ultimately what worms and bacteria feed off is sugar, and molasses is full of sugar. You can use any form of sugar when you're watering your garden, and that'll do the same thing. And that's one of the questions that I get asked quite a lot with my last video around how to make really fast compost in 10 days. Go and check that out if you haven't seen it, because it's a process that I developed to make small batch composting. It's not like this large hot compost pile, but small batch composting that will produce you viable compost in less than 2 weeks. So in about 10 days you can have something that you can use. You can start off with ordinary grass and ordinary leaves, and you'll end up with something that you can use in about 10 days. So it's absolutely brilliant for that. And one of the things that I got asked quite a bit about after that video was, can you use any forms of sugar? Yes, you can. You can use fizzy pop. You can use plain sugar, refined sugar just diluted into water, and use that to water your garden. It's absolutely fine. That's what I've been watering this pile with. That's the reason that I've been using the watering can rather than a hose pipe, because I've been using my molasses water. And that's what I'm going to use again now. So as I'm getting towards the top, I'm going to use more and more molasses water to water my pile down. Yeah, so as I've been getting through to each stage, that's what I've been using, my molasses water. So I've added some more manure to the pile, and that's going to be my final layer. And on to my final tip is make sure you cover the pile. And what I'm using is old carpet. And this is Hessian backed carpet. I actually like old carpet better than other material because it has a lot of insulating properties. You might have noticed with the pallet bins, I haven't lined the sides, and I've done that deliberately because I want airflow to go in. But because hot air rises, I don't want to lose hot air from the top. That's why I cover the top. And it's got plenty of insulation from the 2 compost bins at either side and the hedge behind it. The only side that hasn't got insulation is the front, and I don't mind that. The main area that you're going to lose heat from is the top of the pile. Like I say, do go and check out my really fast composting method. I developed it to be easy, to be made with materials that are readily available, and to be a small batch method, so you can produce compost in 10 days with relatively low materials. You don't have to wait till you've got a bulk amount to build a compost pile like this. So do go and check that out. So I've had enough of playing with all this horse milk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and have a shower. So I'm going to leave it there for this one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.